Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin our second plenary session on the theme Shifting Relationships and the Emerging Middle Eastern Order. Emerging is a demonstration of the fact that the IISS remains optimistic that some order will emerge out of what appears to be a persistent and ostentatious chaos with, as the Secretary of Defense said, strife emerging from various different countries at different times, and the fraying of the local and regional institutions that otherwise might have contained diplomatic disputes and advanced towards the resolution of conflict. And we have on the stage today the Foreign Minister of our host country, the Kingdom of Bahrain, Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa, and the Foreign Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Adel Jubeir, who each in their turn will address these challenges and then will engage in a full debate. There are other ministers and ministers of state with us in the hall from the region, and I would invite any of them who might want to add a point or clarification to do so from their seats, so we hear as many of the regional voices in this session as we can. We will proceed in this order. I'll ask Sheikh Khalid to make remarks from the podium first, then Foreign Minister Jubeir, and then we'll engage in our conversation. Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed first.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the most compassionate.
Distinguished guests, it's a great pleasure to join my esteemed colleague, His Excellency Adel Jubeir, Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia, in this plenary session. And I'd like to thank you, my dear friend, Dr. John Chipman, and Professor Francois Heisberg, and Sir Tom Beckett, and the rest of the IISS team for organizing the 14th Manama Dialogue on what is now the 60th anniversary of the establishment of the IISS, and for their continuous and tireless effort with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to make this event a success year after year. To get to a better understanding of the emerging regional order, we need to first understand the current situation. The challenges we face today are deep and complex and have the potential to alter the region for decades to come. And if we, as an international community, do not take action to direct the coming changes in a way that ensure regional stability, we will find ourselves facing the possibility of a prolonged state of instability and unease. In Syria, a proud and historic Arab country with a multicultural society has now become a battleground for territory and influence, with regional states attempting to take their claims and terrorist organizations and non-state actors competing for influence and control amidst a decline in the capacity of the central government to cope with the various challenges it faces. Although the physical presence of Daesh is almost gone, we cannot discount the possibility of its re-emergence in a different form or under a different name within Syria or anywhere else, so long as the situation remains the same. On the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen has become the latest casualty of the Islamic republics of Iran's quest for regional dominance. The Islamic Republic's interference in the affairs of Yemen and its support to the terrorist Houthi organization has prolonged the conflict and contributes to the Houthi unwillingness to return to the political process that all Yemeni parties agreed to in 2012 and to abandon their armed rebellion. This has led to a terrible situation on the ground in Yemen. The fighting continues and millions of innocent civilians suffer. I assure you, the Arab coalition to restore legitimacy in Yemen is committed to alleviating the effects of this conflict on our brothers and sisters in Yemen, and is committed to restoring stability and ensuring that all Yemenis have their say in the future of their country through a political process that brings them all together to achieve peace and, most importantly, to end Iranian interference in the country. In Iraq and in Lebanon, the effects of regional interference are also stark, as both countries under their respective leaderships attempt to guide their nations towards the path of prosperity. They are confronted by Iranian-backed groups or individuals who place loyalty to the Islamic Republic over the national interests of their countries, resulting in bad governance, inefficiency, and ultimately political paralysis. Hezbollah and associated groups continue to use bases in Lebanon and Iraq to destabilize the region. Young men and women are recruited from across the region and trained in such things as bomb making, weapon smuggling, and military tactics, and then sent back to destabilize their countries and advance the Iranian regime's hegemonic ambitions. The region simply cannot achieve lasting stability and peace of mind so long as terrorist groups, whether state-backed or not, continue to operate in this way. Even within the GCC, we have witnessed attempts by Qatar to intervene in the politics of other member states in contradiction to the agreements signed between GCC members and to the norms of our region. Yet, we remain committed to making the GCC a pillar of regional stability, and we view its role as the most important and vital regional actor, along with Egypt and Jordan, in helping the region return to stability, considering the crisis we have faced these past years. Looking at this broad picture, there is an underlying theme tying all the crises I have discussed so far. It is the attempt by regional states to impose hegemony on others. Whether it is by Iran's decades-long quest to spread their revolution and control more territory through proxies, or Qatar's attempt to seek its own way of influence in the region, I am certain that the emerging regional order cannot and will not be a stable one if regional states continue to compete over dominance and continue to interfere in the affairs of other countries whenever an opportunity arises. The trouble with hegemonic ambitions in our region is twofold. On one hand, they continue to be a constant source of tension and distrust among regional states, who are then forced to take the necessary defensive measures to protect themselves, such as enhancing military capabilities, forging alliances with other regional states, and boycotting offending states. The other effect of regional hegemonic ambition is that they make existing crises even worse. Crises that are not initially caused by regional competition are utilized by aspiring hegemons to further their aims, thereby prolonging the original crisis. In response to the problem of regional hegemonic ambitions, I would like to highlight the critical importance of the role of the region's international partners. Countries that have a role and a stake in the regions such as the United States of America, the United Kingdom, the French Republic, the Russian Federation, and other countries must engage with the region and with one another to help us bring stability and to ensure that the emerging order is a stable one. What we need in the region is a balance, a non-competitive balance between major powers in the region, a balance that does not draw a line, placing countries on opposing sides against one another, a balance of interests, a balance that places the shared interests of the international community in the region first. We believe that our international partners should engage with our region and not abandon it, nor should they support the hegemonic ambitions of regional countries in any way or for any short-term gain. Instead, we call on our international partners to coordinate with responsible regional states to direct the coming changes in a positive way and to realize that the interests of all relevant international states and responsible regional states are very much aligned. We all seek a stable, prosperous, conflict-free Middle East that contributes positively to the world economy. Here, I would like to point out the importance of the proposal from the United States of America to establish the Middle East Strategic Alliance, MESA, as part of the solution to the problems we face in the region. MESA is not against anyone. It is an alliance for security and prosperity in the region, and it will be open to those who accept its principles. Through MESA, we aim to boost the collective security of the region and to make sure our defense partnerships are ready to withstand challenges of the 21st century, including terrorism, cybersecurity, and the effects of rogue states. MESA is not designed as a purely defensive partnership either. It is also an economic partnership that seeks to boost trade and foreign direct investment between its members. These are the kinds of solutions we need in the region going forward. MESA is an example of the ideal vehicles through which to manage the affairs of the region. In Bahrain, we believe in the importance of partnership between allies and of our historic alliances in the region. We are committed to share the burden of protecting the region and have always done our part. We committed our forces to repel aggression almost 30 years ago. We have sent our security forces to aid the missions in Afghanistan, and we have contributed to protecting the Gulf of Aden from piracy. We are an active member of the global coalition to defeat Daesh, and we continue our role in ensuring maritime peace in the Arabian Gulf and beyond as part of the combined task force led by the United States Navy Fifth Fleet based here in Bahrain. We will remain ready to act in coordination with our friends and allies and do what must be done to ensure the stability and prosperity of the region. As we look towards the next few years, we must maintain hope and confidence for the future of our region. And we are confident. We must realize that although change is inevitable, it is up to us to direct the changes in beneficial ways. I'm certain that if we can stop attempts to hegemonize the region, to spread influence and power through proxies, to use free media sources to incite hatred and spread false information by some countries in the region, and if we strengthen partnership between countries that seek to build and not to destroy, countries that seek to make the citizens of the region stakeholders in their own future, we will have gone a long way to ensuring the future peace and prosperity of the Middle East. Thank you very much.
Sheikh Khalid, thank you very much for your interesting call for a non-competitive balance of power, which some analysts in the room might think is just a short step towards a regional concert of powers, but there's probably still a number of steps to be taken before we get there, and those I know will be shortly debated. Could I please invite Adel Jubeir, the Foreign Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to address the Manama Dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for having me here today. The topic is shifting relationships and the emerging Middle East order. Before I address that topic, I'd like to take you back 50 years to show you that nothing has changed in the Middle East. We had in the 60s the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. We had the Baghdad Pact. We had the 1973 October War between Israel and Arab countries. We had the Soviet Union trying to infringe upon the Middle East in search of a warm water port and in search of dominance over strategic waterways such as the Bab el-Mandab area when the Soviet Union had a presence in Somalia. We had in 1979 the Khomeini Revolution, which unleashed sectarianism, terrorism, violence all across the Middle East, and it's still continuing today, and we're paying the price for it. We had the Afghanistan war in the 1980s, where the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, working very closely with the United States, was able to eject the Soviet Union from Afghanistan. We had Saddam's invasion of Kuwait in 1990. We had the rise of Al-Qaeda quietly, along with the Taliban in the 1990s in Afghanistan, which manifested itself in the events of 9/11. We had the American invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. We had the war on terrorism, which has been raging since. And then we have the events in the Arab world of 2011, 2012, which have brought instability to our region. Today we have conflict in Syria, in Iraq, Yemen, Libya, the Sahel countries. We have tensions in Lebanon, in the Horn of Africa, and the list goes on. We have terrorism in the form of Hezbollah, the Houthis, Boko Haram, Taliban. And the only difference is that today the conflicts are driven by regional actors bent on changing the regional order rather than outside powers trying to dominate the Middle East. And the primary regional actor for instability has been the Khomeini revolution in Iran and the behavior and the actions of the Iranian state ever since. What is different today? After having given you this less than optimistic picture, let me be more optimistic. I think there is change in our region, and the change is very significant. There is a focus on economic growth and economic diversification. There's a focus on innovation, technology, efficiency. There's a focus on youth and empowering women. There's a focus on creating transparent, accountable, efficient governments that can provide a better future for our citizens, and in the process improve the standard of living, which we believe will contribute to stability in different countries. We are now dealing in the Middle East with two competing visions. One is a vision of light, which seeks all the things I just mentioned, and one is a vision of darkness, which seeks to spread sectarianism, encourages terrorism, seeks to dominate other countries, and seeks to destabilize the region. One is what we stand for in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf countries. The other is what Iran stands for. And I believe if we learn from history, we always know that light always triumphs over darkness. And so we are going through a challenging period in the Middle East, but it's not more challenging than what we went through 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 50 years ago. The problems we are facing, or the challenges we're facing, are surmountable, and we will, God willing, with wise leadership and perseverance and a pragmatic, proportional, rational approach, overcome them just as we have overcome past problems. So I have no concerns about where the region will end up. It will end up in a better place. It will end up in a more prosperous place, and it will end up in a more peaceful place. But the challenge we have is how do we deal with the forces of darkness? How do we push back against them? And how do we persuade them to either evolve into something else, or how do we defeat them? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And let's now move to our discussion. Can I remind all of you that you do need to go through your 3 steps. And when your microphone lights green, don't get worried to think that a comment that you might make to your neighbor will immediately be picked up by the whole audience. It just means that you're on the queue. And I'm delighted to see 1 or 2 others who were worried that their microphone turned green come back onto my screen. So we've got half a dozen people now. I'll take 5 or 6 questions and then invite the panel to respond. First on my list from the United States was Margarita Stancati. Go ahead.
Hello, I have a question for Mr. Adel Jubeir. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today. My question is, it's a 2-part question. The first one is, there's a lot of interest in what Saudi Arabia has done so far to hold the perpetrators of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi accountable. We know that so far 2 senior officials have been dismissed. Could you please tell us what led to their dismissal? In other words, what do you know so far about their involvement in the killing of Mr. Khashoggi? And also, how can you be so sure that the Crown Prince was not aware or not involved in the operation to target Mr. Khashoggi? And a related question is, you spoke about a vision of darkness and a vision of light. What does Saudi Arabia need to do to maintain or recover some of its standing in the region, for example, whether it's to rally international support behind the war in Yemen, or, as you mentioned, curb Iran's influence in the light of what happened? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few more from India. Bobby Ghosh.
Actually, United States. But also a question for actually both the ministers, since the theme of the discussion is shifting relationships. Would you care to comment on shifting relationships with Israel, and especially in light of the visit by Bibi Netanyahu to Oman?
Thank you. And from Bahrain, Mona Al-Moyed.
Good morning. My name is Mona Al-Moyed. I'm a businesswoman. And my question is to Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed Al-Khalifa regarding the conflict with Qatar. I understand that there is a problem with our neighbor Qatar, but why can't we separate politics from families? Because all families in Bahrain, they are married to Qataris. And, you know, they go through condolences, death. I mean, for example, last week, my cousin, her granddaughter died, and her daughter, who was married to a Qatari, couldn't come to visit her in the condolences. Can't we separate politics from families? This is my question.
Thank you very much. And from the United States, I am sure about this, Ben Hubbard.
I'm curious, I have a question for His Excellency Adel Jubeir as well. I'd like to follow up on what my colleague from the Wall Street Journal said. How does Saudi Arabia plan to convince its friends and allies, many of whom are in the room today, that an operation as complex as the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, involving 15 agents, 2 private jets, an autopsy doctor who would seem to have no role in an interrogation that took place inside of a diplomatic facility, was carried out without the knowledge of the top leadership in Riyadh, including the Crown Prince? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more before coming back to the panel. Faisal Abbas from Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question is for His Excellency, Minister Adel Jubeir. There's been some articles in fellow Saudi media recently suggesting exactly what the title of this session is, shifting relationship, namely suggesting that Saudi Arabia might be changing its alliances in the region in the wake of the kind of recent criticism. Of course, there has been kind of official denials by Saudi officials that that article in particular suggests, reflects the opinion of its writer only. But I just wondered from a Ministry of Foreign Affairs perspective, is there any grounds for any such thinking?
Thank you. So I'll come back for reflections and reactions to those questions. First, Adel Jubeir, and then Sheikh Khalid. Adel.
Thank you. I'll start with the issue of Jamal Khashoggi. We have an investigation that is going on in Saudi Arabia. We also have an investigation that is going on in Turkey, where we have Saudi law enforcement people working with their Turkish friends to uncover the facts. This issue has become fairly hysterical. I think people have assigned blame on Saudi Arabia with such certainty before the investigation is complete. We have made it very clear that we are going to have a full and transparent investigation, the results of which will be released. We have made it very clear that those responsible will be held responsible and will be held to account. And we have made it very clear that we will put in place mechanisms to ensure that this doesn't happen again. Investigations take time, and the facts are determined as the investigation goes on. And we have tried to share the information that we have obtained with the public, but unfortunately there has been this hysteria in the media about Saudi Arabia's guilt before the investigation is completed. And what we say to people is wait until everything is done, then reflect on the results of the investigation, and then make a determination on whether this investigation was serious or not, but not from the get-go. So this is where we are. In terms of details of the investigations, I can't comment on them because I'm not privy to them. Every day we uncover new things. Every day we discover new items. New evidence comes to light that the public prosecutor incorporates into his investigation. And as a result, the picture begins to emerge. So this is where we are. And in terms of the issue of how this was brought about, and that this reflects the involvement of the leadership of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we're trying to uncover what happened. We know that a mistake was committed. We know that people exceeded their authority, and we know that we're investigating them. And it wasn't 2 officials who were dismissed, it was 6, in addition to the 18 who were detained by the public prosecutor for questioning. So anyway, this is where we stand. We will investigate. We will share the results of the investigation. We will hold people to account, and those responsible will be punished, and we will put in place mechanisms to ensure that this doesn't happen again. So wait until the investigation is complete in Saudi Arabia as well as in Turkey, then make a judgment. With regards to the shifting relationships, the issue of Israel, for us in Saudi Arabia, we have no relations with Israel. We believe that the key to normalizing relations with Israel would have to be the peace process, and this is enshrined in the Arab Peace Initiative that was adopted at the Beirut Summit in 2002 that calls for Israel to withdraw from occupied Palestinian territory, allow establishment of a Palestinian state within 67 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital in exchange for peace and normalization with Israel. This remains our position today. With regards to the changing relationships, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has a strategic relationship with the United States that goes back to the 1930s. And that was enshrined in a meeting between the late King Abdulaziz and the late Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That relationship is ironclad. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has been an ally of the Western countries since the beginning of the Third Saudi state in the 1930s. This is not going to change. We have seen the coming and breaking of many storms. We have seen problems in the relationship. We have seen successes in the relationship, whether it's the 1973 oil embargo, whether it's the 1990 liberation of Kuwait. 9/11 was a shock to the relationship, and yet we both go back, roll up our sleeves, work at it, and make sure that the relationship comes out of it stronger than it was before. There is very much at stake in terms of the relationship between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the US in particular, and the Western world in general. We have huge trade and investment. We have huge energy issues. We have a similar worldview in terms of the need for balance and order in our world. We have a huge stake in combating extremism and terrorism. We have a huge stake in freedom of navigation in some of the world's most important waterways. And so those interests continue. This old saying that says, friends come and go, but interests remain. And I think this is how we look at our relationship with the West in general and the United States in particular. So from the foreign ministry's point of view, we don't see that the issue of a need to change. That's not how countries operate. You have permanent interests, you protect those interests, and you align yourself with people and countries that share those interests. Otherwise, change would happen so quickly that our heads would spin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sheikh Khalid.
Thank you, John. Regarding the question from India about the shifting relations in the Middle East and mainly shifting relations with Israel, Bahrain has always supported and championed any effort to reach a solution for this very important issue that has been going on for several decades. The issue of conflict between Israel as an occupying power of the Palestinian territories and the aspirations of the Palestinian people to gain their own country, independent, and as a way forward for the region. We have supported from Madrid, we've been supportive, and then of course we hosted back in the early 90s a multilateral that included an Israeli delegation here, an official delegation here in Bahrain, as many other Arab countries did in our quest for peace. We have wholeheartedly supported the initiative by the King of Saudi Arabia for peace, and that was adopted by the Arab Summit in Beirut. And it's always been our position to do so. So in this case, with the visit of the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, to the Sultanate of Oman, we definitely never ever questioned the wisdom and the farsightedness of His Majesty Sultan Qaboos in trying to help and do their part in reaching a solution for this issue. And this is something that we look forward for His Majesty to succeed in his effort. The question from Mona Al-Muayyad about people's relations, people couldn't make it. Actually, there is no policy to prevent people to travel to or come from Qatar if there is an issue like the one you mentioned or any other humanitarian issue relating to family matters. I don't know what exactly happened in that case, but no one is prevented when cases such as these or other humanitarian issues, connection between families, and all our families are, in both countries. So the people-to-people relationship continues to be the same and never changed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have a healthy second round of half a dozen more, and I invite others also to seek the floor. Could I start with Major General El-Keshki from the Arab Republic of Egypt?
Thank you, sir. If you allow me, I'm going to ask my question by Arabic.
Go ahead.
Recently, there were many alliances and coalitions under different names in the Arab region. The different names of these coalitions and alliances, don't you believe that they are in contradiction with each other's? And if ever we have all of these alliances and coalitions having one objective, wouldn't that be better to have just one coalition under one name for the whole Arab region? Thank you.
Thank you. Crispin Blunt from the UK.
A question for Sheikh Khalid. If the search for full accountability for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi is perceived in Saudi Arabia to have failed, and the conclusion drawn in Saudi Arabia that any dissent and freedom of expression will not be tolerated in future, is there any chance that those dissidents and commentators now in Saudi Arabia could find refuge here in Bahrain, relying on Bahrain's tradition of tolerance and freedom, and Bahrain in turn relying on its international partners who share those values of freedom and tolerance, namely the United States, the United Kingdom and France?
Thank you. And from Lebanon and the UK, Barry Al-Mudin.
Thank you, John. My question is to both Ministers Sheikh Khalid and Minister Jubeir. When we were listening to General Mattis, the Defense Minister of the USA, I couldn't help but think talk of the promise to protect this part of the world and to keep it safe, specifically from Iran. I wonder, sir, if you had the same thoughts, and I wonder, sirs, I mean, and I wonder if you have any strategy, because also we hear from you the same talk of you know, you're all very concerned. So do you have a strategy to tackle Iranian proxies, Iranian expansion in the area? Thank you.
Thank you. Fleur de Villiers.
Thank you, John. My question is directed to Minister Jubeir. Given Russia's scarcely benign intervention in Syria, how does he view Russia's obvious attempt to expand its influence in the Gulf?
Thank you. And from Algeria, Adel Hamaizia.
Hello? Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Also from Britain, may I add.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for this opportunity. A question for FM Al Jubeir, my namesake. Sheikh Khalid suggested that the GCC remains a key pillar in this region. Following the last GCC session in December of 2017, Saudi and UAE announced a military alliance, a coordination council. How do we reconcile GCC's relevance, or perhaps a resuscitation in due course, and that point? And to that end, if you could share any comments on the Turkey-Saudi relationship beyond the Khashoggi affair, but also given the fact that Turkey now has a military alliance of sorts with both Qatar and most recently Kuwait, and of course any comments on where the neutral zone stands within that new relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take one more before coming back to the panel, but I do have 5 or 6, and don't worry, we'll have a third and possibly a fourth round as well. Greg Karlstrom.
Thank you, Minister Jubeir. Saudi Arabia spent several years at the end of the Obama administration being very critical of the administration, treated President Trump almost like a savior. We're 2 years into the Trump administration now. Iran's influence in the region has not been meaningfully constrained in any way. The conflict in Syria is not going any better than it was 2 years ago. From a Gulf perspective, it would seem none of your strategic interests have been advanced by the Trump administration. And meanwhile, the close association with Trump has tarnished Saudi Arabia's image in Washington. It's made it a partisan issue. It's alienated a lot of Democrats. Did the kingdom make a mistake by throwing all of its cards in with President Trump?
Thank you. Perhaps I'll invite Sheikh Khalid to take some of the questions first and give Minister Jubeir 1 or 2 more moments to reflect on the many addressed to him. Sheikh Khalid.
Yes, thank you. Relating to the question by Mr. Crispin Blunt about the issue of finding refuge here, first of all, let me say it clearly. Beside this issue of Jamal Khashoggi, but there is also for us a very important issue, which is the new policy and the new approach of Saudi Arabia in opening up its own society, its own affairs, and its relationship with the rest of the world. To us, this is something that we looked at most importantly. We see the general public of Saudi Arabia, how active they are in being partners with their leadership and building their new Saudi Arabia for the future. So when it comes to refuge, we think that Saudi Arabia itself is a refuge for stability and for future vision for our region here. So we see ourselves in the same position as Saudi Arabia in this matter. The question by Bari Alamuddin, yes, we do have a strategy, and it's a multifaceted strategy. There is a security strategy to face the Iranians and their efforts to destabilize our country, and we work together with our allies. Secretary Mattis mentioned the display that is being done in Washington to showcase what the Iranians are doing. We do have a strategy to work with all our partners. So we don't see ourselves with no strategy, and we don't see ourselves outside the strategy being presented now to counter the threats of the Islamic Republic. And definitely we will always, our minds will, first and foremost will be with the Iranian people in this matter. So yes, we are working day and night on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. And just before I turn to Minister Jubeir, I thought I might burden him with one more question. Both Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis and Foreign Minister Sheikh Khalid mentioned in their prepared remarks the proposed Middle East Strategic Alliance. And I wonder whether, Minister Jubeir, you might say a few words about how the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would proceed to advance this vision. We know that the intention is to create a framework understanding that involves all 6 of the GCC states, potentially Jordan and Egypt as well, leading to a summit in Washington that would ultimately lead to a new treaty that would, in all probability, from at least the US side, need to be ratified by its Congress. Given that ambition, how in the current climate do you propose that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would advance and shape that MISA proposal to make it workable in the current political context, and to ensure that it operates effectively to advance what Sheikh Khalid termed this non-competitive balance of power that the region potentially needs? Adel.
Thank you. Let me address the questions that were raised with regards to the issue of numerous military alliances in the region and the need to unify them. I believe that there are interests that countries have that are very regional in nature that cause them to come together. But I wouldn't describe it as a multiple alliances within the Arab world. I think we have the GCC, and we have security arrangements with a number of our other partners, Egypt, Jordan. So I don't think that the issue is we have too many alliances in the Middle East. With regards to the issue of Iran and a strategy for Iran, and the Obama administration and Trump administration not containing Iran, I think our strategy regarding Iran has been fairly effective in the past few years. We have isolated Iran in the Islamic world. We have isolated Iran in Africa. Iran's friends or relationships are shrinking. Now the Iranians are facing severe sanctions. Those sanctions will become even worse beginning in November. I think there's a realization that Iran, as the primary state sponsor of terrorism in the world, cannot continue with business as usual. So that is progress. With regards to the issue of the Trump administration, we went through challenging times with the Obama administration. That would be an understatement. We saw the Middle East unravel. We saw reluctance and hesitancy in providing weapons to the moderate Syrian opposition, which led to essentially the Russians intervening in order to save Bashar al-Assad from collapsing. This was a strategic mistake on the part of the Obama administration. Drawing a red line and not enforcing it causes countries to not respect you, and causes them to be more emboldened. So now we have the Trump administration, President Trump, and then you have this notion of we're pivoting to Asia, which again creates the impression that the vacuum is being created in the Middle East, and whenever you have a vacuum, evil forces flow into it. So all of this was playing into the hands of the Iranians. President Trump comes into office and says, I will protect America's allies, I will protect America's interests, I will fight terrorists. and I will not lecture our friends and allies. And that is a rational, realistic foreign policy that all of us in the Gulf subscribe to. What has he done? He has defeated ISIS in Syria because he wasn't hesitant about deploying force in order to get the job done. He has defeated ISIS in Iraq when it took years for the Obama administration to make any progress. He has put Iran on notice that business as usual cannot continue. He has imposed sanctions against Iran, with more to come, as I mentioned. And so yes, Iran is contained, and Iran will become more contained. And Iran will have to decide if it wants to continue to pay a severe price, or if it wants to become a respected member of the international community. And for Iran to do that, it has to stop its nuclear program, it has to stop its missile program, it has to stop its support for terrorism and its interference in the affairs of other countries. It's that simple. So yes, we are walking in lockstep with the United States as the United States of America, as our strategic ally. And America has a president who wants to protect its interests and be more robust in doing so. And we support that. And it's not about partisan politics, it's about national interests. National interest for the US, national interest for Saudi Arabia. Now, the other question I think that came up was one about the GCC and the different coordinating councils. The GCC remains the GCC. It remains the most important institution for the countries in the Gulf. We have issues with Qatar, but we have tried to make sure that it minimizes the impact on the GCC so that when those issues are resolved, the GCC can continue moving forward. We have military coordination that has not been disturbed by this tension or conflict with Qatar. We have joint military exercises. The ministerial committees, most of them meet in order to deal with functional things like health and education and what have you. And until the conflict with Qatar is resolved, the idea is to minimize the impact on the GCC because we want to preserve the GCC and we have every intention of doing so. The Turkish-Saudi relationship, Turkey is a friendly country. We have good trade and investment relations with Turkey. We have areas where our interests overlap, for example, in Syria. We both are concerned about Iran's expansionist policies. And so this is where we are. The neutral zone issue with Kuwait is one that has been resolved. We're now working out or talking about the modalities for resuming production of crude oil in that neutral zone, and I expect, God willing, that we will be able to do so fairly soon. Yes, okay, on MISA, we have been very supportive of the concept of the Middle East Security Alliance. We have had extensive discussions with the United States administration about this, as well as with our partners in the GCC. We have exchanged ideas between us, the collective us, and the United States to see what the best format for setting it up is. I think those discussions are ongoing. We held meetings in Saudi Arabia recently with all of the GCC countries, plus Jordan and Egypt, to review the ideas and see and come up with a common framework. And our discussions with the United States are still ongoing, where the ideas are still being fleshed out. The concept or the framework is still being developed, and I would say it's a work in progress. The objective is to create a security architecture that can provide security for the region against common threats. That's the objective. How we get to it, whether it's an alliance, whether it's a treaty, whether this is something that the discussions are still ongoing, and I expect we've covered a lot of ground, but there's more that we need to work on, and all of us are in those discussions among ourselves in the region, as well as between us and the United States. So we're very supportive of it. We think it would contribute to stability and security in the region, and we think it would enhance the relationship between the countries of the region and the United States.
Very much. So one quick round, three people from Egypt. Heba Salah.
Yes, this is a question to Mr. Jubeir, and Turkey has asked for the extradition of the 18 people detained by the kingdom. Are there any discussions about this, and would the kingdom consider sending them to be tried in Turkey? And another question is that Germany has decided to stop arms sales to the kingdom. Are there going to be any measures against, punitive measures against Germany in terms of access to the economy, contracts, that kind of thing?
Thank you. And Rashal Jundi from the UAE.
My question is for His Excellency, Mr. Adel Jubeir. I want also to ask about MESA. Do you think that the aim of the United States would be enhancing this alliance to expand to Turkey as well, or Israel in the future, when the peace process with the Palestinians would be reached? And also, I want to ask: is it necessary for this alliance to be successful to resolve the issue with Qatar? And if I may, another follow-up question is about the Muslim Brotherhood. Do you think that now, with the event that's happening around the world, is there a concentration about a new wave of Muslim Brotherhood in the region that's been supported by certain institutions? Thank you.
Thank you. And from Italy, Dr. Maria Fantappi.
Yes, my question is for Minister Jubeir about Saudi Arabia relations with Iraq. We have waited a long time for the formation of this government in Iraq. How he see, after the formation of the government led by Mr. Adel Abdul Mahdi, the evolution of Saudi-Iraq relations? Thank you.
And finally, Dr. Chung-Min Lee.
Thank you, John. My question is to Foreign Minister Jubeir. I understand completely, Minister, why Saudi Arabia is so concerned about Iran's rise and the steps you have taken to that direction. The reason why there is this continuing fallout from the unfortunate Khashoggi incident is because the credibility of the kingdom's foreign policy in this region and with your global partners in Europe and Asia are being impacted. So my question to you, sir, is how do you propose to overcome the consequences of this particular incident in an effort to increase Saudi Arabia's credibility in the eyes of the international community? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So again, I'll turn to my immediate left and invite Adel Jubeir to respond to those questions, and then I'll give the last word on this session to our host, Sheikh Khalid. Adel.
On the issue of extradition, the individuals are Saudi nationals. They're detained in Saudi Arabia. The investigation is in Saudi Arabia, and they will be prosecuted in Saudi Arabia. With regards to arms sales from Germany, we stopped purchasing arms from Germany several years ago. We have different reasons for doing so. We don't want to put the German government in a difficult position politically, nor do we want to sign agreements to later have them suspended. So the issue of Germany not selling arms to Saudi Arabia is not an issue that I think is a relevant one. It may be symbolic more than practical. With regards to MESA and other countries joining it, as of this time, the discussion is the GCC countries plus Egypt and Jordan. We don't believe that the conflict with Qatar will have an impact on developing this. The discussions we had in Saudi Arabia on MESA included officials from Qatar. We have had military exercises in Saudi Arabia that include Qatar. We have had GCC exercises that include Qatar. We have Saudi officers at Al Udeid Air Base, and we have Qatari officers at the naval base here in Bahrain. So the military aspect of the security aspect of the GCC, we have made sure would not be impacted by the political conflict with Qatar. With regards to the Muslim Brotherhood, the people forget that the Muslim Brotherhood is the grandfather of Al-Qaeda and the great-grandfather of Al-Nusra and the great-great-grandfather of Daesh. The Muslim Brotherhood begot us Takfir and Hijrah, the group that assassinated Sadat. Takfir and Hijrah begot us Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda begot us Al-Nusra, and Al-Nusra begot us Daesh. That's why we oppose the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's why we think of it as a terrorist organization. And that's why we have taken steps, along with a number of our partners, to diminish their influence or their ability to influence our events in Saudi Arabia. With regards to Saudi-Iraqi relations, I would describe them as excellent. We have opened up a new chapter with Iraq over the past 2 years. We have had extensive visits by senior officials in both countries. We have set up a joint coordinating council that includes more than a dozen ministries in each government. We have opened up border crossings. We have resumed commercial traffic between the two countries. We have opened our embassy in Baghdad, and we're opening an embassy. We have a consulate in Erbil, and we're opening a consulate in Basra, and another one in Najaf. We're looking at investment projects in Iraq. We've committed $1.5 billion to that effect, and we're looking to see what else we can do. We have great respect for the new Iraqi government, both the president, the prime minister, and the speaker of parliament. We look forward to, they're known people to us, and we look forward to working very closely with them in order to move our relationship forward. In terms of the question of how do we overcome the consequences of the Khashoggi incident, we overcome it. The issue is, as I said, is being investigated. We will know the truth, we will hold those responsible accountable, and we will put in place mechanisms to stop it from happening again, and we'll be very transparent about this. And we will continue with our policies in terms of protecting our interests and in terms of working with our friends and allies around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's difficult to say a last word, but I'll pick something that was really discussed extensively today. And this is the matter of Mesa. Mesa is very important. As I mentioned, this is a threshold that we are crossing in the region towards the future, working with our friends and allies for security and stability and prosperity for the people of the region. I think when we come back next year, Mesa will be prominent on our agenda. Then we will be making strides towards achieving that goal by the time we gather again. But definitely, as I said, this is not a closed club. This is an alliance that will ensure that the region moves in the right direction between all the responsible countries now. And it's not a closed place. It's open to like-minded world powers, and there are many of them today. We're taking it step by step, working with the United States of America. And it definitely would send the right message to other states that don't fit the criteria today, but could be members, active members in the future for Mesa. Many countries were mentioned from the floor today. I heard many names, but none of them are excluded. That could send the right message everywhere that we have a future together. Thank you very much.
Sheikh Khalid, thank you very much. And one of the purposes of the Manama Dialogue, an enterprise on which we jointly entered, was to invite more transparency of debate on sensitive strategic issues, and I think we have had that this morning. For that, I thank both of our speakers and the delegates. You now have deserved a 30-minute coffee break. Thank you very much indeed.